Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're doing something a little different.
Yeah.
We are shifting our focus from, the usual tech news and headlines, and we're heading straight to campus.
Oh, I like that.
Specifically, the Technical University of Berlin.
A virtual field trip to the lecture hall. I'm in.
Exactly. So if you're listening to this right now, there is let's say, a very high probability that you are staring at a calendar that is just screaming, winter term 25-26 exams.
And you're probably wondering how on earth you're supposed to synthesize 5 very dense lectures of innovation economics into one coherent thought.
Yes, into something that actually makes sense. You've got the slides. We're talking about the macroeconomics block here, lectures 10 through 14.
Yeah.
You need to connect the dots.
It's that classic pre-exam state of mind, isn't it? It's a mix of panic and probably a lot of caffeine.
100%. And that is our mission today. We are taking that stack of PDFs, which, let's be honest, can look like a totally disconnected wall of bullet points and Greek letters at 2 in the morning.
I've been there.
And we're going to build the narrative. We're going to walk through the actual logic of how innovation, shifts the tectonic plates of the economy.
And it really is a tectonic shift. I mean, we're not just talking about how some startup sells a new widget. We are getting into the big stuff.
Good, like
Like how ideas actually spread through an entire population, how robots and AI restructure the whole labor market, what fundamentally drives GDP, and, the biggest question of all,
which is,
can we save the planet without completely crashing the global economy?
it's a heavy stack. The slides lay it out. Diffusion, employment, growth, globalization, and sustainability. Sounds like a lot to cover.
It does, and it can feel a bit disjointed when you're just clicking through the slides, but there is a through line. There's a pattern.
Okay, so what's the pattern? What should you be looking for as you're studying?
It's the tension. It's the constant push and pull between the free market on one side and what we call market failure on the other. Every single one of these lectures is essentially asking the same core question. The market does X naturally, but is that result actually good for society? And if it's not, what do we do about it?
So it's about the interplay of policy, human behavior, and just the raw economic mechanics.
Precisely. It's where theory meets the real, messy world.
Okay, hold that thought on market failure. Let's start at the beginning, where the innovation actually enters the real world. Section 1, based on Lecture 10. The mechanics of spreading ideas. Diffusion.
Right. Because an invention that just sits on a shelf in a lab is, from an economic standpoint, totally irrelevant.
It has to move. It has to be used by people.
It has to diffuse.
Now, the slides make a very specific, almost pedantic distinction right at the start between diffusion and adoption. I think in normal English, we kind of use these interchangeably.
We do. I adopted a new phone. The new phone diffused through the market. It sounds similar.
But here, in this course, they're treated as 2 very distinct variables. Why is that so important?
It's crucial, and you'll definitely want to have this clear for the exam. Think of it as the difference between, say, particle physics and fluid dynamics.
Okay, I'm listening.
Adoption is the particle. It's the micro-level event. It's a binary decision made by one single agent, you to either accept or reject an innovation.
So do I buy the electric car or do I stick with my old one?
Exactly. Do you install the solar panels or don't you? It's a yes or no at the individual level.
So adoption is the unit of analysis. It's like one person casting a ballot in an election.
A perfect analogy. Which means diffusion is the aggregate result. It's the macro-level process. It's how all those thousands of individual yes votes accumulate over time within a social system.
It's the election map changing colors over the course of years.
Precisely. So to put it simply, adoption is the decision. Diffusion is the spread.
Got it. And when you track that spread, that rate of adoption over time, the slides say it almost always produces the same geometric shape.
The S-curve.
The famous S-shaped curve. It pops up everywhere.
It really does.
Now, the slides highlight a name here that I have to admit I wasn't expecting. Gabriel Tarde. And the year is 1903.
Right. The laws of imitation. It's fascinating, isn't it? We tend to think of innovation studies as this very modern discipline, born in Silicon Valley or in post-war manufacturing labs.
Oh, you think of tech bros and venture capital.
Exactly. But Tarde was a sociologist mapping this out over a century ago, long before the internet, before television, before any of the mass communication tools we take for granted.
So what did he see back in 1903 that still holds up today? What was his big insight?
He understood that humans are fundamentally mimetic creatures.
Mimetic.
We copy each other. We imitate. And he realized that this copying mechanism isn't random. It follows a predictable, almost mathematical pattern.
Okay, so let's visualize this for the student listening, maybe on their commute to campus. We have time on the x-axis at the bottom and cumulative adoption, the percentage of people on the y-axis going up. Walk us through the anatomy of that S-curve. How does it start?
It starts at the bottom left with a long, flat tail. This is the incubation phase.
Okay, why is it so flat?
Because in this phase, you have really high engineering effort, super high costs, and honestly, pretty low performance. The technology is clunky. It's not user-friendly.
Can you give us an example?
Think of the very early internet in the early 90s.
Yeah, the dial-up screech.
That sound, and you wait 5 minutes for a single tiny image to load. There were very few users. Adoption is just crawling along. You're putting in massive effort for very, very little market movement.
And then you hit what these slides call the knee of the curve.
The inflection point. This is the magic moment. This is where the feedback loops kick in.
What kind of feedback loops?
Well, costs start to drop dramatically, performance improves, and critically, social proof starts to build. Your friends have it, you see it being used. The risk of being the only one disappears.
And the curve goes.
Vertical.
Right.
Shoots up. This is the exponential growth phase. Suddenly, it feels like everyone needs to have the thing, and they need it now.
And then finally, where does it end?
It ends at the top of the S, the plateau. This is saturation.
Meaning you've just run out of people.
You've run out of potential adopters. Everyone who is realistically going to buy a smartphone, for example, now has a smartphone. The market shifts from a growth cycle to a replacement cycle. The rate of new adoption slows right back down to a crawl again.
Okay, that makes sense visually. But the slides then introduce two different theoretical models to explain why the curve moves that way. The epidemic model and the probit model.
Right.
These sound like they belong in a biology class and a statistics class, respectively.
And they kind of do. They're important because they offer two different views of human nature, which is really what we're talking about.
So let's start with the epidemic model. What's the core idea there?
The epidemic model treats information like a virus.
Okay.
It assumes that the innovation is objectively good and that everyone would adopt it if only they knew about it. The only constraint is contact. It's about exposure.
So it's purely about communication. I meet you, I see you have the cool new iPhone, and I catch the virus of wanting an iPhone.
Exactly. It's a contagion model. It focuses on the spread of information through social contact, and the math behind it looks exactly like a model for a disease outbreak.
Okay, that's one view. What about the probit model? How is that different?
The probit model is, well, a bit more cynical, or perhaps just more realistic from an economist's point of view. It assumes people are different.
In what way?
It says, wait a minute, we all know about the innovation. Information isn't the problem. The problem is we have different thresholds of utility.
Meaning, I might know everything there is to know about the new Apple Vision Pro, but I'm not buying it.
Why not?
Because my personal threshold for either the price or maybe for looking a bit ridiculous in public hasn't been crossed yet.
Precisely. The probit model says adoption happens not when I catch the bug from you, but when the innovation's value proposition, its price, its features, its ease of use, crosses my specific individual utility threshold.
So one model is about information flow, the other is about individual differences.
Exactly. One focuses on contact, the other on heterogeneity.
This leads us directly to the next part of Lecture 10, the cast of characters, the adopter categories, shown as a bell curve.
This is classic Rogers theory, but it is absolutely critical. For the exam, for any business strategy, you cannot treat the market as a single, uniform monolith. It's a huge mistake.
Okay, so let's break down the psychology of these groups. You've got the bell curve, which shows the number of new adopters at any given time. And on the far, far left, we have the innovators, the first 2.5%. Who are these people?
These are your true tech enthusiasts. They are obsessed with the new. They don't need the product to work perfectly. In fact, they kind of enjoy that it doesn't. They need it to be new.
They're the risk takers.
Totally. They're risk-seeking. They are the ones funding Kickstarter campaigns for products that might never even ship. They're often a bit disconnected from mainstream social groups. They're in their own world, focused on the tech itself.
Then right after them come the early adopters.
These are your influencers, your trendsetters. They aren't technophiles in the same reckless way as the innovators. They are visionaries.
What's the difference?
They see the strategic advantage of the new technology. They can connect the dots and see how this new thing could change their business or their life. They are the opinion leaders. If they adopt, They send a powerful signal to the rest of the herd that it's safe to come in the water.
And then the herd arrives, the early majority and the late majority.
Right. This is the big, fat part of the bell curve. This is where you make your money. The early majority are pragmatists.
They're not taking any chances.
No. They want references, they want case studies, they want to know that it actually works and that other people are using it successfully. They adopt just before the average member of the social system.
And the late majority.
They're the conservatives, they're skeptical. They adopt just after the average member, and usually it's because of peer pressure or because the old system they were using is being phased out and they have no choice.
And finally, way over on the right tail of the curve, the laggards.
The traditionalists, they are the very last to adopt. They are deeply suspicious of change, and they often possess limited resources, which makes them extremely risk-averse. They only adopt when there is absolutely no other choice left.
So, tying this all back to our listener, why does this distinction matter so much for a TU Berlin student specifically?
Because if you're studying entrepreneurship or innovation management, this model dictates your entire go-to-market strategy.
How so?
You cannot use the same marketing message or even the same product features for an innovator that you use for the early majority. It will fail.
Give me an example.
Innovators want to hear about the technical specs, the potential, the vision. They'll tolerate bugs. The early majority wants to see a testimonial from a happy customer. They want a solution to a problem, not a science project. If you try to sell a buggy, feature-incomplete prototype to the late majority, you will go bankrupt.
So understanding where you are on that S-curve dictates your entire business model at that moment in time. Okay, so we've diffused the technology, it's out there, it's spreading, and now comes the panic.
Oh, yes.
Section 2, which covers lectures 11 and 12, employment.
The robots are stealing our jobs debate. It never goes away.
This is probably the most politically charged part of the course. You see headlines every day about AI writing code or robots flipping burgers, and the core anxiety is just so obvious. But the slides tackle this with cold, hard economic modeling. They present a labor market model.
Yeah, and it's important to start with the basics of that model. It's very simple initially. You have a supply curve for labor. That's us, the people looking for work.
And then you have a demand curve for labor. That's the companies looking to hire people.
Exactly. And where those two lines cross, you get the equilibrium wage, which is labeled dollar, and the total level of employment, lauder.
Simple enough. Supply meets demand. But then, as the slides say, innovation enters the room.
And the slides state it very clearly. It's a key phrase. Innovations affect the labor demand function.
And here it is, the million-dollar question. Which way does it shift that demand curve? Does it shift it to the left, meaning fewer jobs, or to the right, meaning more jobs?
Well, this is the core of the debate. The slides break this down into two competing effects. You have the substitution effect and the compensation effect. You absolutely need to understand the mechanism of both of these.
Okay, let's start with the bad news, the one everyone fears, the substitution effect.
This is the intuitive one, the one that fuels the headlines. The innovation, let's say it's a new robotic arm on an assembly line, increases the productivity of capital. The machine can do the task cheaper, faster, or better than the human.
So the firm substitutes capital for labor, machine for person.
Correct. As a result, the demand for labor falls. That demand curve shifts to the left. And in the simple model, that means wages drop and employment drops.
That is the technological unemployment scenario in a nutshell.
That's it. But then you have the compensation effect. This is where the economist comes in and says, wait a minute, the story doesn't end there.
What happens next?
If the robot makes production much more efficient, the unit cost of the product goes down.
Okay, it's cheaper to make each car or each widget.
Right. And in a competitive market, the firm has to pass those savings on to the consumer. They lower the price of the product.
And because the price is lower.
Consumers now have more real income. Their money goes further, so they buy more of the product. And if they buy enough more, the firm has to expand its total production scale so massively that it actually needs to hire more humans than it had before.
Even with the robots.
Even with the robots. Maybe not for the same task, not for the assembly line, but for other tasks. For logistics, for sales, for maintenance, for design.
So the robot kills the specific task, but the efficiency gain from the robot might save or even expand the total number of jobs at the firm.
Exactly. To put it in economic terms, the substitution effect reduces the labor demand per unit of output, but the compensation effect increases the total output. It's a tug of war.
And the slides say that the referee in this battle, the variable that decides which effect wins is elasticity.
Price elasticity of demand. This is a concept you must nail for the exam. It is the absolute pivot point of the entire argument.
Okay, so let's define it very, very clearly.
Elasticity is a measure of sensitivity. That's all it is. It asks a simple question. If I drop the price of my product by 1%, does the quantity that people demand rise by more than 1%? If yes, demand is elastic.
And if it rises by less than 1%?
Then demand is inelastic. It's not very sensitive to price.
Okay, so let's walk through the scenarios that are laid out in the slides. Scenario A1. This is where we have price elastic demand.
Right. Think of products that have a lot of substitutes or are seen as luxuries, consumer electronics, for example, or maybe a specific brand of potato chips.
Okay, so let's say 4K televisions.
Perfect. If innovation makes it possible to sell 4K TVs for 50% less, people don't just buy the same single TV and save the money.
No, they buy way more. They put one in the bedroom, one in the kitchen.
Exactly. A small price drop leads to a huge explosion in volume. In this scenario, the volume increase is so massive that it completely overpowers the labor-saving nature of the robots on the assembly line.
So the compensation effect wins.
By a landslide. In this case, innovation creates jobs.
Okay, now for the other side. Scenario A2. Price inelastic demand.
Here, the slides give the classic examples of gasoline or something like life-saving cancer medication.
Right. If the price of your cancer medication drops by 50%, you don't start taking twice as much of it just for fun.
Of course not. You buy what you need. A lower price is great for your wallet, but it doesn't dramatically change the quantity you demand.
So small price change leads to a small quantity change.
Very small. The volume doesn't expand much, if at all. In this case, the efficiency gains from automation just mean you need fewer workers to produce roughly the same amount of medicine. The substitution effect wins.
And innovation, in this case, reduces employment.
Correct. So the answer to the big scary question, do robots create unemployment, is?
It depends.
It depends on the demand elasticity of the sector. That is the nuanced university-level answer that the exam is looking for.
That's the theory. But the slides don't just stop at theory. They are heavy on empirical data. They want to show us what actually happened in the real world when these technologies were introduced.
And this is where it gets really interesting because the history is surprisingly optimistic. The data tends to bust a lot of the doom and gloom myths.
Okay, let's look at the first big one cited, the Japan study. It looked at the period from 1978 to 2017.
Yeah, this is a key citation. Adachi and his colleagues. They looked at Japanese manufacturing over a massive 40-year period.
And what did they find?
They found that an increase of just one robot unit per 1,000 workers actually boosted employment in that region by 2.2%.
Boosted it. That's the complete opposite of the substitution story. Why, Japan is an aging society. You would think robots were brought in specifically to replace people.
It goes back to competitiveness on a global scale. By automating, Japanese auto manufacturers and electronics companies kept their costs down and their quality incredibly high. They crushed their global competition.
So they grew.
They grew so much that they needed more people to handle the sheer scale of their operations, in management, in R&D, in global sales. If they hadn't automated, they would have lost market share to competitors in other countries, and everyone at those firms would have lost their jobs.
That aligns perfectly with another study mentioned, the Webb study from 2019 on firm survival.
Exactly. This is the adapt or die argument, supported by data. Webb found a strong positive link between a firm's investment in automation and its long-term survival. The counterfactual to automation isn't everything stays the same and we all keep our nice jobs.
The counterfactual is the firm becomes uncompetitive, goes bust, and we all lose our jobs.
That's the stark reality that this data points to.
There's also a study from Finland mentioned.
Hirvonen and his co-authors, a very similar finding. They looked at the adoption of a whole range of advanced technologies and found it led to increases in hiring at the firm level. It just reinforces this idea that, in many cases, technology and labor are actually complements, not just substitutes.
So the big takeaway for the student here is, don't fall for the lump of labor fallacy.
Please don't. That's the debunked idea that there's a fixed amount of work to be done in an economy, and if a robot does a slice, our slice gets smaller.
The economy isn't a fixed pie.
It's not. Innovation changes the composition of tasks, and that transition can be very painful for the people whose tasks are automated away. We can't ignore that. But historically, it hasn't reduced the total number of jobs in the long run.
However, the slides do add one more modern twist to this. They mention the gig economy.
Right, the Birch study. This is important because it suggests a shift not just in the amount of work, but in the fundamental nature of work.
What do you mean?
We aren't just seeing changes in how many jobs there are, but what kind of jobs they are. There's a big move from stable, long-term employment contracts to task-based gigs.
Like driving for Uber or delivering food.
Exactly. It lowers the barriers to entry for workers, which can be good. Anyone with a car can start earning money. But it also removes a lot of security, benefits, and stability. It's making the labor market much more fluid, which changes the dynamics of our simple supply and demand model in ways we are still trying to figure out.
Okay, that's a lot on the labor market. Let's zoom out. Let's go from the individual worker to the national scoreboard. Section 3, the engine of growth, Lecture 13.
Right. We're looking at the big one now, GDP. What drives the wealth of nations?
We all know the obvious answer is R&D and new inventions. But the slides spend a weirdly large amount of time on standards.
I know, it sounds boring, doesn't it?
It does. ISO certifications, DIN numbers, Wi-Fi specs. Why are we talking about what seems like bureaucracy in a lecture about growth?
Because standards are the unsung heroes of macroeconomics. The lecture defines them very specifically as public goods, and that's the key.
Okay, let's do a quick refresher from Econ 101. What makes something a public good in the economic sense?
A public good has to meet two specific criteria. It has to be non-rivalrous and non-excludable.
Break that down for us. What does non-rivalrous mean?
Non-rivalrous means that if I use the good, it doesn't stop you from using it at the exact same time. My consumption doesn't deplete it. So if I use the standard for a metric screw thread to build a table.
It doesn't stop me from using the exact same standard to build a chair.
Exactly. We can both use it, and the knowledge isn't used up.
Okay, and non-excludable.
That means once the standard is published, I can't really stop you from reading it and using it. I can't exclude you from the benefit. It is, by its nature, open knowledge.
So standards are this giant shared pool of open technical knowledge.
Yes, and just imagine for a second a world without them. Imagine if every single company had to invent its own voltage for electrical outlets.
Chaos.
Or its own format for data transmission. The friction in the economy would be insane. Standards/transaction costs. They allow for modular innovation. I can build a computer mouse because I know exactly what a USB port is. I don't need to invent the port myself.
The slides lay out a very clear logic chain here. It goes, more standards leads to a larger pool of public knowledge.
Which then leads to greater diffusion because now everyone is speaking the same technical language, which in turn increases the likelihood of adoption.
So standards basically lower the risk and the cost of innovating for everyone. They lubricate the S-curve.
Perfectly put. They make the whole engine run smoother and faster.
Okay, I'm sold on standards. But this brings us to a major friction point in the lecture. We're talking about growth. But our listener is at TU Berlin. They're very likely studying sustainability. We all know about planetary boundaries. The slides tackle the post-growth debate head-on.
This is probably the most philosophical and maybe the most important part of the whole course for your generation. The question is, can we have innovation without economic growth?
The gut instinct, the traditional economic view, is to say no, absolutely not.
Right. The logic is innovation requires investment, investment seeks a return, and that return requires growth. If the economy stops growing, does the incentive to innovate just stop?
Yeah, it's a scary thought. But the slides cite a very, very important study here, Jasny and Schubert from 2023, and they found a fascinating decoupling that you really need to understand.
Okay, what did they find?
They investigated the relationship between growth and innovation activities at different levels. And they found that at the firm level, growth is strongly, undeniably associated with innovation. Innovative firms grow. That's a fact.
So if a company invents something great, it wants to get bigger. It wants to eat its competitors' lunch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That seems to be hardwired into the system. However, and this is the crucial part, they found that sector-level growth is not necessarily required for that innovation to happen.
Wait, unpack that. How can individual firms be growing if the overall sector isn't? That sounds like a contradiction.
It implies a kind of zero-sum game, or what you might call a steady-state economy. You can have a dynamic economy where the total GDP is flat, you're staying within planetary boundaries, but inside that economy, it's a shark tank.
So, there's churn.
Massive churn. The innovative clean tech firms are growing rapidly, but they are taking market share from the non-innovative, dirty incumbent firms. The dirty firms are shrinking and eventually dying.
It's pure creative destruction in the Schumpeterian sense.
Precisely. The aggregate pie doesn't get bigger, but the slices are constantly changing size and shape.
That is a critical distinction. It means that post-growth does not have to mean stagnation. It can mean dynamic equilibrium.
Which is a much more hopeful message for a sustainability student, isn't it? It suggests you can save the planet without killing the fundamental human drive to invent better things.
Which really is.
And speaking of non-traditional models and sharing knowledge, the slides also make a point to mention open source software, OSS here.
Yes, the Blind and Schubert study. It's another great piece of evidence. They show that open source contributes significantly to GDP and, interestingly, acts as a complement to patents, not just a substitute.
How so?
It creates another one of those public knowledge pools, just like standards do. It provides a foundation that proprietary software can then be built upon. It proves that non-proprietary collaborative models can still drive huge macroeconomic value.
This is the perfect transition into the pure sustainability angle. Section 4, the environmental paradox. This section draws from the guest lecture recap in the slides.
And here we have to get really clear on market failures, specifically a concept called externalities.
Market failure 101. An externality is a cost or a benefit that affects a third party who didn't choose to incur it. And crucially, it isn't reflected in the market price.
Pollution is the textbook negative externality. The factory makes steel, and in the process, it emits smoke. You live downwind and you start to cough. You pay the cost with your health or with higher healthcare bills. The factory does not see that cost on its profit and loss statement.
And because that pollution cost is ignored, the market price of the steel is artificially low.
Which means we consume too much of it. That is the failure. The market is sending the wrong price signal.
Okay, that's one externality. But the slides say environmental innovations face a unique double externality. This comes from a paper by Rennings from the year 2000. What's the second one?
This is what you could call the tragedy of the green innovator. If you are a company trying to develop a new, clean technology, let's say a better carbon capture filter, you face two huge problems at once.
Okay, what's problem one?
Problem one is the negative environmental externality we just discussed. Your competitors are still polluting for free. So your new, clean, and probably expensive technology is competing against old, dirty technology that is artificially cheap. You are trying to play a fair game on a tilted field.
That already sounds tough. What's problem two?
Problem two is the positive knowledge externality. This comes from the nature of innovation itself. If you actually succeed, if you spend millions in R&D and invent that amazing new filter, the knowledge of how you did it often spills over.
Spills over.
Yeah. Engineers move to other companies, patents are published, and your competitors can invent around them. They can reverse engineer your product.
So you paid for all the hard work, but society, and more annoyingly, your rivals, get a big chunk of the benefit for free.
Exactly. You bear the full private cost of the R&D, but you don't get to capture the full social benefit of the knowledge you created.
So let me get this straight.
Yeah.
You're hit from both sides. You're competing against cheaters, the polluters who don't pay their costs, and at the same time, you're subsidizing free riders, the competitors who copy your ideas.
That is the double externality, and that is the fundamental reason why the free market, if you just leave it alone, will never produce enough green innovation. The math just doesn't work for the individual firm.
This is the QED, the quad erat demonstrandum for government policy.
Absolutely. The double externality is the core economic justification for state intervention. It tells you that you need the state to step in twice. You need a carbon tax or a cap-and-trade system. That's to fix the first problem, the negative pollution externality. And you need R&D subsidies or public research funding. That's to fix the second problem, the positive knowledge spillover. You have to use policy to fix the math and make green innovation profitable.
That makes perfect sense. It's not about politics. It's about correcting a fundamental structural flaw in the market's incentive system.
Precisely. You have to level the playing field.
Okay, finally, let's scale this all the way up to the planetary level. Section 5, which is based on Lecture 14, globalization.
Where trade meets tech. We're zooming out to the absolute maximum now.
The slides identify two massive, powerful forces that are shaping labor markets all over the globe, trade and technology. And they often get lumped together because they can have very similar effects. They shift demand away from certain types of workers.
But here we look specifically at the underlying theory of trade, which is comparative advantage, the old David Ricardo theory from the textbooks.
This is the idea that countries should specialize in what they're best at, right?
Well, more subtly, what they're relatively best at. The theory says that even if the U.S. is better at making everything than, say, Bangladesh, it still makes economic sense for them to trade. Because the U.S. should focus its resources on what it is most better at, say, software design and pharmaceuticals. And Bangladesh should focus on what it is relatively efficient at, like producing textiles. It creates more global efficiency overall. Everyone wins.
That's the optimistic textbook story. But the slides warn about something called divergence.
This is the catch. This is the sting in the tail, because not all specializations are created equal.
Explain that.
High-tech sectors, the things like software, biotech, advanced robotics, they tend to have increasing returns to scale. They have steep learning curves. The more you do it, the smarter you get, and the faster your sector grows.
And low-tech sectors.
Things like commodity agriculture or basic assembly of electronics. They often have diminishing or, at best, constant returns. There's a ceiling to how much more efficient you can get.
So, if the rich countries specialize in the fast growth stuff, and the developing countries get locked into specializing in the slow growth stuff,
the gap between them doesn't close, it widens every single year. That is divergence. International trade might make the total global pie bigger, but it can simultaneously lock developing nations into a low-growth trap.
and then you bring this right down to the local impact.
Yeah.
The slides mention the literature on things like the China shock and its effect on local employment in the West.
Right. Globalization isn't just abstract numbers on a national spreadsheet. If your town, your region, specialized in something like furniture manufacturing, and then trade opens up with a country that can do it for a fraction of the cost, your local labor market can completely collapse.
And the friction of the real world means those furniture makers don't just instantly become software engineers overnight.
Not at all. They often end up unemployed for long periods or in lower-wage service jobs. It connects right back to our discussion on the labor market. Globalization, just like automation, creates winners and losers. And the job of the macroeconomist and the policymaker is to figure out how to manage that painful transition so the losers don't get left behind entirely.
Wow. Okay. We have really unpacked this entire stack of lectures.
We have, from a single decision to the entire globe.
Let's try to synthesize this for the listener one last time before we let them go. If you are sitting in that exam hall at TU Berlin, how do you connect all these dots into one story?
Think of it as a causal chain, a flow.
Okay, lay it out.
It all starts with diffusion, the S-curve. That's the model for how fast a new technology enters the system.
Then that new technology slams into the labor market.
Where the concept of elasticity determines whether it ultimately creates jobs through the compensation effect or destroys them through the substitution effect.
All of that activity at the firm and worker level then aggregates up to drive national growth.
A process which is lubricated and made more efficient by public goods like standards and open source software.
But if we want to make that growth sustainable,
we have to use policy to fix the double externality that holds back green innovation.
And finally, all of this domestic activity plays out on the uneven and often unfair playing field of globalization,
where the logic of comparative advantage can, paradoxically, lead to divergence between rich and poor nations.
It connects beautifully when you see it like that. You really cannot understand the labor market debate without understanding diffusion first. You can't have a serious conversation about environmental policy without understanding externalities.
It's all one big system.
So here is the final provocative thought. Something to chew on while you're walking to the exam hall. We're doing that last bit of revision.
I want you to go all the way back to that Jasny and Schubert finding.
The one about firm growth versus sector growth.
Exactly. If innovation, as we know it, has always been driven by the desire of the firm to expand, to sell more, to conquer new markets, to get bigger, but we, as a society, now understand that we need to limit our aggregate growth for the sake of the planet. Can we truly design a steady-state innovation economy?
Is the very nature of innovation inherently expansionist? Or can we design a system where we innovate just to get better, not necessarily bigger?
Is sustainable innovation a fundamental oxymoron, or is it the ultimate design challenge for your generation of economists and engineers?
That is a huge question. And I think that's exactly what these courses are trying to prepare you to answer.
Indeed it is.
Before you can make sure to check the link videos and the lecture slides, there's some really great visual explainers on the labor market model if you need a refresher on the math. Good luck with the winter term exams, TU Berlin. You've got this.
Good luck.
See you on the next Deep Dive.